Will you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Today, friends, is Stewardship Commitment Sunday. It's that day when we fill out our pledge cards, the day that we commit and we recommit ourselves to God's work in the world and in this particular congregation. It's the day when we put our money where our mouth is, when we respond to God's generosity in our own lives by giving back. Those statements are all lovely theological ways of saying that this is the day when the pastor asks everybody to give money to the church. So why, Ginna, you might say, on this Give Your Money Sunday, are you preaching from a parable that makes us so darn uncomfortable? Fair question. The parable of the talents is a strange little parable, and it does make a good many Christians, myself included, very uncomfortable. Maybe it's the way that God is portrayed as a master willing to turn on his servants, a harsh man. Maybe it's the part about the weeping and the gnashing of teeth. Maybe it's that line that seems to directly contradict everything else we read in Matthew's gospel, the part where the master says, "For to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance, but from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away." Really? So much for blessed are the poor. This parable makes us uncomfortable, and well, it should, because this is a story about taking risks. I don't know about you, but I don't particularly love taking risks. It took me 10 minutes this morning to recalibrate preaching from an iPhone. It doesn't come naturally to me to do things differently, to step outside my comfort zone, to take a risk and try something new and a little dangerous. It's all well and good that the first and second servants multiplied the master's money, but I identify with the third servant. Maybe you do too. I identify with the one who takes his money and buries it in the ground. I don't like to live beyond my means. I've been taught spend only what you have and save some for a rainy day. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, etc., etc., etc. It's not a bad approach to finances or to life. Some risks are reckless. Some risks are not worth taking. From driving when it's icy and dark outside to gathering for in-person worship during a global pandemic, there are some risks that I feel confident Jesus is not calling us to take. The gospel does not call us to recklessness with our lives or with our money. But the gospel does call us to this risky business of faith. Faith. Jesus calls us to have faith in God's kingdom. This is a parable of the kingdom, after all. Jesus calls us to have faith in the promise that goodness is stronger than evil, that life is stronger than death, that in the end, God's love wins. This is a parable about believing in God's kingdom and living accordingly. Friends, if I understand the text, Jesus calls us to risk living right now as if the kingdom were already breaking into the world. To love our enemies now, to proclaim, "Blessed are the poor" today, to welcome the stranger and turn the other cheek as if that were the only way we could possibly live. Because in God's kingdom, it is the only way to live. Jesus asks us to risk investing our lives and our resources in the future that we believe is possible. Faith in God's kingdom can be countercultural. It can be uncomfortable. And sometimes it's downright frightening. Hitching our lives to the promise of God's goodness, justice, and love is indeed risky business. But could we live any other way? Think about it. Can we who follow Jesus really bury our treasure in the sand? Can we, whom Christ calls the light of the world, ever really hide that light under a bushel? Can we, who have witnessed the power of resurrection in the world and in our own lives, do anything but care profoundly, invest deeply, give our hearts away, and risk our lives, our talents, our treasure for the sake of God's kingdom? Which brings us again to Commitment Sunday. Friends, today we are called to take a risk. Today we challenge ourselves to pledge our money to the work God is doing, to the work that we trust God will continue to do in this congregation. Today we make monetary pledges for a future that is largely unknown. And as if pledging itself weren't enough of a risk or an act of faith, today we also embark on a major capital campaign to make much needed repairs on a building that we can't even gather in right now. Talk about risky business. As we embark on this project, it's worth asking, could our efforts fail? Sure. Will they be costly? Absolutely. And yet, friends, I tell you this. Every time I have been challenged to increase my giving, God has responded by showing me that I have enough. Every time I have been called to go somewhere I was afraid to go, God has responded by getting there first and showing up as the welcoming committee. Every time I have dared to open my heart to a person or group of people I wasn't sure I knew how to love, God has responded by meeting me in those relationships and loving me back. And every time that God has challenged this congregation to invest ourselves more deeply in what God is doing in our community, from doubling our giving to the Taos Medical Debt Relief Project, to revitalizing our music program, from taking controversial public stands to support our local immigrant communities, to reforming our youth group, even to 50 years ago when we erected that back building that today we raise money to fix, when we did that leap of faith so that groups like AA and Girl Scouts and PFLAG and Big Brothers, Big Sisters could meet in a central location, every time God has shown up. Every time God has pulled back the veil between heaven and earth, and just for a moment, given us a glimpse of God's kingdom. Friends, we are kingdom people. We are the ones that take the risk of believing in God's future. We are the ones who keep the faith that God's love and goodness will win the day. So let's live like it. Let's take the risk. Let's invest our lives and our resources in a future that we cannot yet see, but that we believe is coming. Let's plant seeds, water them, and trust that they will grow. God's kingdom will come. God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Thanks be to God. Amen.